And in the end, to lose body fat, you have to reduce your calorie intake, right? And if you choose so by doing keto or intermittent fasting, whatever you choose, then it's up to you and up to what you enjoy eating, probably, right? So it's the best diet. The best diet doesn't exist. The best diet is the one that you can stick to for over an extended period of time, right? So it's, if that works for you, then yes. If that doesn't work, then no. And
Well, Artur, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to Your Body's Way. I'm so happy you're here. And we were just literally talking about how you've just literally flown in from California yesterday. So you're kind of in a bit of a jet lag, feeling a bit of jet lag at the moment. So I'm just really grateful that you managed to make it onto this call. How are you feeling at the moment?
I'm fine. I feel good. Well, thank you for having me, first and foremost. I'm fine. I'm not fasting anymore, which I'm supposed to. That's going to the conversation is going to be about. But then we can also speak about how I fast on the planes, etc. So
yeah,
that's one thing, I think. No, but I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Not that jet lagged.
Okay, good. I believe that you went to California for a conference, or what was it?
Yeah.
Can I ask what it was for?
So I went to San Diego. There's a conference called IRSA. IRSA is this global fitness and health organization, and they organize meetups and conferences, more specific ones. But this particular one that I go to once a year is a global one. So they sort of usually it's always in the US, and it usually attracts more people from the US, but also a lot of operators and so fitness gym operators from the UK and from Europe come there as well. There are some people from Asia as well, and generally it's all about the trends in health and fitness and wellness more than health, probably, but also because the whole area is now merging. I think that's what is usually discussed at these conferences. It was 4 days of sort of knowledge and everything about fitness and also operating clubs, etc.
I can imagine it was really intense 4 days, but that's what I really like about how you operate and how you work. You're so passionate about how the fitness industry is evolving and all of the opportunities that are coming up for trainers, and body optimization, how to optimize your training, how to optimize your health. So that's what I really love about what you do. And that's why I need to kind of pick your brains today, because I don't know if you know, but this podcast is basically part of a build a killer body series. So basically it's just me interviewing fitness professionals at the top of their game, advising the listeners how to achieve the body of their dreams. So I thought today would be really awesome to chat to you about fat loss, because I know that that's something that you are very something that you're keen on yourself, something you do with yourself and with your clients. And digging into intermittent fasting and keto, which are two of my favorite topics. But I also have some holes in my knowledge as well that I'd like to talk to you about. And then just some general kind of ways to lose body fat, and just kind of digging into all things body fat loss. So I'm really excited for it. Awesome.
Me too.
Yeah. So first of all, when it comes to your story, I'd like the listeners to know how you got into the fitness industry and how you got to where you are now, because you're a trainer, you're an entrepreneur, you've got lots of stuff going on. So just give the listeners some background into you first.
All right, so very briefly, I started with movement, I would call it, from a very young age. So I started training karate and martial arts when I was 8. I grew up in Poland, so it's, we couldn't start earlier than 8 years old, just because the training was too tough, and it was really too tough. It was, it was amazing, really, because you would have one trainer, one coach, and 120 kids, and no word would be said. It was very quiet, and no noises, and so the discipline was different. I think that it taught me a lot. So the traditional martial art taught me a lot. And that's how I got into sports, pretty much. And I started competing, and started getting into more stuff such as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu later in life, and more sort of boxing, kickboxing, Thai boxing, try a little bit of everything. I wasn't the best at anything. It was probably karate was the best, but I just like exploring that stuff. I never wanted to be a professional fighter or anything like that. But I just like the component of discipline, but also sport and developing a skill, and also a useful skill that you could potentially help you to save yourself from some sort of trouble. That's one. And then so I guess I got into, and then also nutritionally, I was raised vegetarian when I was a child. So that was very strange because I grew up, as I mentioned, I grew up in Poland. I was born in 1985, and my parents at some point, 1987 actually, decided to be vegetarian, which was very unheard of. And nobody really knew what being vegetarian meant, right? So then for a very long time in my life, I was vegetarian, but I always had to sort of explain myself to people why I eat the way I eat. And I would be always asked questions. So probably sometimes bullied as well, just because people wouldn't believe, couldn't understand why you wouldn't eat just like everyone does, right? Like everyone else does. Anyway, that sort of got me to understand that I never criticized the way other people see food and nutrition. I'm always very curious about it, but I would never dare to criticize anyone for anything they do, right? And then fast forward, I moved to Austria, to Vienna, when I was 20 to do my university, my degree there. My degree is in communications, so it's something completely different. But then I started also, I just started traveling and modeling around the world, and I also got more into training. So I think that's the body composition part, when I sort of had to be in a certain shape in order to make money, right? To book some jobs. So that was the thing that sort of got me into body composition. And I also started training female models while I was traveling. So that got me to understand what maybe what I say female models, because male models would usually be too proud, and they usually were in a very good shape, so they don't need to be trained. But women usually are more curious, and they're they're much braver to ask questions than men. So that's how I got into it. And then when I moved to London, I started, and also I was writing a lot about health and wellness. So I was a journalist, traveling, modeling, studying. I started writing more about health and fitness. And when I moved to London, I took up training more full time. And that's how I met your husband as well. And then now I'm sort of still training people, still training clients, some part of my time. And then I'm also working opening a sort of high-end facility in London. I have my own business, still very much into health and fitness. And I mean, this is what I do all, day and night pretty much. So I live and breathe.
I just wanted to say, I can imagine being vegetarian in Poland. That is very unheard of, because I've been to Poland once. No, actually, I've been twice. And both times the meals are very meat heavy. It's like slabs of like pork knuckle, like a huge pork knuckle, and these amazing meats. And it's like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine what that was like for you.
But but just for clarification, actually, when I was 24, I got back from a very long modeling trip in Asia for 12 months. And I got back and I started eating fish because I felt like I wanted to eat fish. And I needed to decide it myself. I didn't want anyone to tell me what to do. I just needed to decide myself. And actually last year I started eating poultry. And actually this year I started eating red meat as well. So that's not just because I thought, I think just my introspection a little bit. Last summer, I sort of asked myself the question, why don't I actually do it, right? So what's the reason why I don't eat meat? And there wasn't any reason apart from because this is how I was raised. So, sort of curiosity took over. When I went home, I took my nephew to see my parents, and I said to my mom, I think I want some chicken. And then she was like, okay, I'll grill you some chicken. And that's how I started eating chicken. And the more poultry, I had some duck, I had some turkey, I had more stuff. And then I went with some friends to a really good restaurant. They had steak, and I was like, okay, let me try it. And that's how I got into steak. Again, I don't, I do it very moderately, so I don't eat it every day. And I think the best approach is to have a bit of a flexitarian approach, if you will. It's just sort of a modern term. But yeah, I eat meat now.
That is so interesting. I didn't realize that you hadn't eaten meat until quite recently. At the age of 24, you moved into fish and then you moved into meat pretty recently. That's I had no idea. But I have a really interesting question then. When it came to your training, have you noticed a difference since you started eating meat?
It's easier to get protein though. I have noticed a big difference when I first started eating fish, just because it was the animal protein. It was much easier to get protein from food, right? From whole foods rather than from supplements. So that was much easier. With meat, with chicken and red meat, it's easier to get protein. I feel like my strength, hasn't changed. I don't think anything changed significantly, and I'll say I observe myself a lot, and I don't think a lot of stuff changed. Maybe I have put on some more muscle because I may be eating more protein. But again, because I don't consume that huge amount of meat, I didn't notice the difference. One thing I did notice with steak, for example, is that you have to chew it for much longer. So you have to work on your food actually for much longer. That was an interesting discovery. But I think in terms of my performance, and funny, a lot of people ask me if I had an issue with digesting the actual meat, because maybe my body didn't have the right enzymes, or but that wasn't the case. I was actually fine straight away. I did not see any difference.
Wow. So how set were you on measuring your protein requirements when you're a vegetarian to how you are now? Because you mentioned that eating meat is so much easier to get your protein. So were you struggling to get your protein requirements before, or were you not really watching it as much?
You know what? I wasn't struggling, but I did measure it much more when I started training. So I started seriously training when I was weightlifting by training. But because I used to always train, but the weightlifting journey started when I was 21-ish, right? So 21-ish. So the first year was sort of very easy because you have the advantage of a new lifter, so-called. So you just get the window of opportunity where your body really adapts very quickly, and you just get the muscle gains, right? Yeah. But then at some point you sort of have to start paying more attention to strategizing more on training and on nutrition. So then actually that was the time when I got back from Asia. I used to track everything. So write down carbs, so all the macronutrients, carbs, fats, proteins, and I'll just write down and hit the target every day. So I don't remember now, I think 240 grams of protein a day. So it was a very high protein intake. Yeah. But it helped me to, I had put a lot of muscle throughout, probably. I remember when I was in Asia, that was the last time I was under 8. So it was like 80 kilograms, and now I'm like 94. And that's, so over years, I sort of managed to gain muscle without gaining any fat, or like minimal amounts. So I would go maybe that sort of like a mini bulk, but then you would always gradually, I would get more and more muscle. So I think it's doable, but it takes just much longer than the traditional sort of, you go through the gain phase and then you cut, you bulk, you cut, you bulk, you cut, which probably is not the healthiest approach for what we know now, but that's how people traditionally used to do it. So, for me, I used to pay more attention to it, to answer your question. So long story short, but then I think what's called now intuitive eating, where people sort of have an idea roughly of what they need. This is what I do now, right? So I don't feel like I need to track anything anymore. I sometimes do it just out of curiosity. And it's good to do it, I think, because you can get very comfortable and habitual about your eating habits. But I generally don't track anything now.
Right. Yeah, I think anybody who is starting out a training program, it's a really good idea to track what you eat. Not that it's the most accurate way of doing things. I mean, tracking your calories, I can't think of anything less accurate, but it is a really nice way to kind of have a benchmark. And it's a really nice way to kind of discipline yourself when it comes to food.
Yeah.
And when it comes to building muscle and losing fat, a really key component is getting enough protein. So usually I'd say if someone trains fairly hard, like if they train like 4 to 5 times a week, or if they're older, let's say 50s, 60s, then their protein intake would need to be like, God, I'm trying to think now because I get confused between pounds and kilos, but about a gram per pound of body weight.
Yeah, so up to 2 grams
What do you think of
per.
that?
I think so. That would
I mean,
work
it's a
out
lot.
roughly
It's a lot.
almost
Yeah.
like 2 grams per kilogram, right? So
That's
I
right.
operate in kilograms. That's quite high. I've done it in the past, and it has benefits. It had for me at least. The problem is it's to get to that amount of protein. It's a lot. Like you actually have to supplement. You have to really pay attention to it, right? Which with intermittent fasting, by the way, is going to be difficult because you have reduced amount of time that you can ingest food, which means that in that shorter period of time you would have to ingest more protein, right? So the sheer volume of food is just larger. So I think this is the problem. I would say that with protein, I agree with you, and you always, and that's if you look at the research across the board, it all confirms that
But in real life, you're like, I'm not sure how it works with real clients though, like day to day.
Yeah, and the real clients, it's you ask. It's obviously it's a tough thing. Like it's what I mean by that is it's just tough to get this volume of food into to ingest them. Like even if whether or not they fast, it's still quite tough, right? So if you think about a large guy, and some people say that 2 grams per kilogram will be for fat-free body mass, meaning that just the muscle mass. So you have to work out the body composition and then see how much body fat they have, and then work out how much protein they eat. So some people look at it that way, right? I think just get as much protein as possible without getting too much, and which is unlikely because it's also the satiety levels with protein are quite high. So just and the right type of protein as well, probably after training and before going to sleep, etc. We used to get very geeky about it, and you would have casein before going to sleep, but the digestion will be much longer, and it's I probably have tried everything. So it's
So it sounds like you're much more relaxed these days. You're like, I've been there, done that. I've done the measuring. I've done all the geeky stuff with all of the macros. Like now you're kind of settled and you're more realistic now about how you approach it.
I mean, you have to go through this process if you want to understand your body better. I need to know what works for you, what doesn't, right? It's the same with any approaches. Low carbohydrate diet. We spoke about keto, right? Which low carb doesn't mean keto. Then intermittent fasting or high carb diets. You just have to understand what serves you best for one, your performance, for two, your body composition, but probably above all for your health and for the way you perceive yourself, but also the way you feel mentally about yourself. Because I think diet will have a direct impact on all those components. So you have to understand, maybe you look better, but you won't feel that great mentally sometimes as well, because that can affect going really low with your body fat percentage can have an impact on the way you feel mentally, right? So there is this really good graphic from Precision Nutrition. It's called the cost of getting lean. So it shows you what trade-offs do you have to make in order to get to a certain body fat percentage. So what costs you socially, what meals you cannot consume. So it's quite a good way to visualize of what really one has to do in order to get to a certain body fat percentage. And sometimes it's for some people and for a lot of people it's going to be too high of a price to pay, because to walk around with a six-pack, okay, you can my theory is once you get to that point you can actually allow yourself for more, right? So but it will cost you a lot of commitment to get to that point and to be able to maintain that. And so for you just change the threshold a little bit, right? So it's it's going to take a lot of commitment if you want to be in just aesthetically, simply aesthetically, if you want to be in really good shape, it's going to take you a lot of commitment.
Yeah. And I've spoken to a few women recently who have been in the bodybuilding industry. They've been on stage or they're currently preparing for being on stage. And my gosh, you talk about sacrifice, like the sacrifice that woman makes to getting her body fat right down is obviously her menstrual cycle. Like obviously her hormones are, kind of thrown up into the air, and she can't get a menstrual cycle. Well, a lot of women can't. So there's a huge sacrifice when it comes to achieving like a six pack and getting seriously low body fat. It's mad what people actually have to go through. But
absolutely. Yeah. And there's the same. I recently listened to a podcast with Andy Huberman and Dr. Sajin Panda. They speak actually about fasting, intermittent fasting, and then there's a topic about women who intermittent fast. And what you sometimes see that even the 12 hours of fasting is usually fine, but what sometimes happens that the menstrual cycle is being disrupted just because they would change a lot of factors at the same time. A lot of components of their lifestyle would change at the same time, right? So they would start working out harder. They'll do some more HIIT training. So they'll do some more, some more cardio training. They'll do some weightlifting. Then they start eating healthily, which means just salads, right? So then they restricted the feeding window, meaning that there's so much change going on that hormonal cycle is being disrupted, and that probably has to do with the circadian rhythm as well. So all in all, you can actually track it. There's this, I forget now what it's called, but you can actually track all these lifestyle changes to understand what is actually, what works, what doesn't for you. But again, obviously the hormonal situation for women is much more complicated than for men, because your men usually would get a very low testosterone, maybe some other ones will disrupt as well. But for women, the cost can be quite high.
Yeah. And I love that you've brought that up, because intermittent fasting, which we are going to go into in a minute, but intermittent fasting itself is, in my point of view, it's a really amazing tool to use as and when it's right for you in your life. It's so good for you. It's something that a lot of us need to grasp and something that we need to do more in our lives. But like you just said, the type of person who goes into intermittent fasting is usually doing a whole other load of things at the same time, because she's trying to get into shape. So she's probably training as well, and she's probably doing keto, and she's probably doing like all of the things to get into shape. And that's the part that needs to be looked at, rather than just the intermittent fasting. Like when it's not exercising. Yeah,
absolutely. But it's just like with everything, it's never the one factor to blame. There's always a range of things that are just like with lifestyle, right? So if you think about getting in a better shape, just training is not going to be enough. Just training and eating better is probably better, much better. But if you don't sleep well, that's probably going to interrupt you getting that goal as well, right? So there's always more things to look at rather than just one simple factor. So intermittent fasting is good in itself, but it can come with it can come at a cost as well, just depending on what you change.
It can. I mean, I have personal experience of that. So a few years ago, I was intermittent fasting, I was doing keto, and I was training, and I was doing all three of those things pretty hard. And now looking back with 2020 vision, I'm like, okay, I know what I did wrong there. I was just eating way too little calories. Like I was barely enough to sustain my active lifestyle. But I felt great. Like I felt amazing. But then it took me 2 years to conceive my baby boy, who's 1 now. And back then I was like, God, I have no idea what's going on. Like, I don't know why I can't conceive, like what's happening. And I've told this story on a couple of podcasts, so sorry, anybody who's heard it before. But I went to a doctor and I went to a nutritionist because I wanted 2 opinions. And both of them were like, okay, just look at you, first of all. Like I was very slim. And they were looking at my food diary and they were like, yeah, you're not eating enough. And I love intermittent fasting. I love keto. I love training hard, but you've got to make sure that you're getting the nutrients that you need to fuel that lifestyle. And that's the trap that I fell into. So that's just a warning to people, like just to not, get sucked into that, because it's quite easy. Yeah.
And it's, things, it also depends on the type of your personality. But it's some things can be addictive, and fasting in a weird way can be addictive, right? So if you go for one day, you want to challenge yourself, you want to go for 2, why not, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes you want to get it to 3, which is fine if you're under supervision, if you clearly know what you want to get out of it, rather than, oh, I just want to fast for the sake of fasting, right? Or you think you believe so much in this being good for you that then you start making not so smart decisions just because you believe it's good for you, right? And we also bias when it comes to approaches, but I think this one I'm trying to be slightly more open-minded about stuff, right? Hence why I started eating meat, because I was just like, why, just be a little bit more introspective about it, which is difficult because we always are going to be biased about ourselves, right? And also we have strong views about, listen, I've been intermittent fasting. I started intermittent fasting 2011 or 12. So before anyone even, there was one guy speaking about it. There was a Swedish website called leangains.com. He's still sort of active, but he was the first one to who started using intermittent fasting for body composition, but also as a lifestyle, right? So and first my best friend back in Vienna started doing it. I was like, oh, you're dumb. Like you want to gain muscle, eating, this is never gonna happen. But I saw really good results with him, and he and I was working at an office, I was working with a startup, and then I was training like a maniac. So I'll do boxing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, weightlifting, karate, and a bunch of other stuff. And I also studied in my university. So I was like, okay, and I would carry meals with me everywhere I go. I would have like a box of meals. So then I decided, okay, for my lifestyle, it's probably better to just start and try the fasting thing. And the rest is then I was fasting. So for a very long time, I was very religious about it. So it would be, I would be preaching it to people that fasting is so good, but then at some point people get tired of me, and I got tired of preaching it to people. So it's what I want to say by that is that we all sort of strongly biased about things, right? And fasting is just a tool. It's nothing. Obviously, there are potentially some really good health benefits to fasting. Speaking of autophagy, but that's not that clear yet. So we don't know yet. But there's a lot of talk, not much research to back it up yet. But it's just a tool. And I always say, for me, it works, and maybe I could get bigger and, stronger on some other diets, but that for my lifestyle, the way I work, the way I sleep, the way I function, that works best for me. Right. So that doesn't mean that it's best for everyone else. It doesn't mean that it's best for, for if you want to conceive a child, if you want to, if you want to get in the best shape of your life, maybe it's not the best strategy. It can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be your way of doing it. And again, the personality type is also very important, because some people are hungry in the morning, and they just are, like it's or some people are hungry in the evenings. It depends how you want to do it, right? But again, it's just, for me, just a tool. And I think we need to understand that it's okay if you do it differently sometimes.
And I love that you use the word that it's a tool, because I'm in complete agreement with that. It's not something that you do forever. It's not something that, once it works, you're like, oh my God, like I'm losing weight, this is going so well for me. But that doesn't mean that it's going to work forever. So with any tool that you would use in your toolbox, you would cycle in and out of it. So you would kind of use it sometimes and, kind of come away from it when you need to. But so you mentioned that you intermittent fast and that there are some benefits that you saw. So let's just go into what intermittent fasting means to you. And you use it as a tool. So what do you tend to use it for with yourself and with your clients?
Okay, so for me, I started using it because of my lifestyle. And then I noticed that I felt less lethargic throughout the day for fasting. And I really liked the clarity that came with it, right? So I could think much clearer. I could be more productive, and I could, that, however, combined with very hard training, doesn't work. Like, it just simply doesn't work, right? Ketogenic approach or a lower carb approach, because I never really go ketogenic, because ketogenic is, it's essentially fat, because if you're really, it's really hard to get into actual ketosis. That also doesn't work with the high performance sports, right? Like martial arts, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, super high intensity, so you have to fuel that as well. Being a model messed me up a little bit because I always sort of wanted to be in a good shape. I needed to be in a good shape because, I would almost always have to be ready for a photo shoot. So if there was a booking coming in from, say, Men's Fitness, I would have to be ready for it, right? So just because that strategy worked for me, I sort of always kept doing this sort of low carb, more fasting type of approach. But that doesn't mean that was best for me in terms of other areas of my life, right? So for me, fasting, how I use it now though, like I probably changed because I used to combine the low carb approach with fasting, right? So that would work for me in terms of the body composition. Now I still intermittent fast because I love it. It just
how many hours do you do?
Usually 16, and I try to keep it the same hours because the newest findings, I think, were that you sort of your body will anticipate food at certain hours. So you also get the hormone release, and then also the way you sleep. That's so the whole thing is affected, which makes sense, right? If you think about it logically, it makes totally makes sense.
Sorry to cut you off because I just don't want to forget this, what I'm about to say. But it's funny you mentioned that because I'm experimenting now with having my eating window earlier in the day. So usually I'd skip breakfast and then have lunch and dinner. But now I'm experimenting because of the circadian rhythm, because I want my sleep to be better. I'm experimenting with eating earlier. So having breakfast and lunch and having sort of like a late lunch, early dinner. And it's because, like you said, like to if you're having trouble sleeping, which to be honest, my sleep isn't great recently. Like from about 1 o'clock to about 3 o'clock, I'm wide awake and I'm just like, oh my God, it's seriously again, like another night of this. And it's been happening for months. I'm just like, okay, let me try and change things up a bit. So I'm experimenting with that at the moment. It's really early in my journey, but by having breakfast, it's like putting your eyes in the sunlight, and it's like kind of showing your body that it's time to wake up. So it kind of makes sense if you want your sleep to get better to kind of eat earlier in the day and have less in the evening. So that's what I'm experimenting with at the moment. Where would you say your eating window is? Is it early or later?
It's probably later, simply because of how my life is structured.
Yeah,
because I would start work usually I wake up at 6 o'clock. I delayed my caffeine by 90 minutes usually. So I just drink water in the morning, some electrolytes, and then I'll start working with clients at 7 o'clock in the morning. I'll usually have 5 to 6 hours of training with clients. Then I would do some type of a meditation or anything like NSDR, which is non-sleep deep rest protocols, 10 to 20 minutes. So just to switch off from my clients, because coaching can be quite mentally draining sometimes, intense. And then I go to the office and then I do all the work. So between that sort of 12, my meal is usually between 12 to 2 o'clock. So 12 to 1:30, right? So that's usually my first meal. And that's like my breakfast. I'm eating much higher carb at the moment. And that in terms of body composition, the way I feel, it's much better for me. And then I usually would finish around ideally 8 o'clock. Sometimes it takes me slightly longer just because I train in the evenings. So I would do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the evenings. So then when I get home, I usually eat way too much. That's not a good thing. But typically this at the moment how my life is structured, and because work and business are so important, I sort of have to prioritize that. But that doesn't mean that that's why I adapted it. But I was okay. I cannot maybe have that feeding window in 8 hours. Fine, I have it in 10 hours, right? So it's okay. But usually I would go 14 to 16 hour fast, and then 8 to 10 hour feeding window.
And you said you're training your jiu-jitsus in the evening. So do you do any fasted workouts in the morning?
Not at the moment, no. I used to, but jiu-jitsu would be okay. But I feel better when I'm fed. And that also depends on if I do jiu-jitsu in the morning. It all depends on what I eat the day before, right? The night before, say. So I would probably have to have a higher carb meal, more complex carbohydrates to fuel that jiu-jitsu in the morning. Well, if I do weights, so if I weight lift, I'm okay training fasted, and that's absolutely fine.
Same. I mean, I was going to say I love fasted workouts simply because it's just my preference. So I think when it comes to, I think the theme here is that people should do what suits them, what their priority is, and what keeps them motivated. So for me, training fasted is just my preference because I enjoy it and I don't like to feel heavy when I'm training.
Yeah.
Like I don't like to feel something in my stomach. However, it's interesting because usually I try and get my workouts in the morning, but I saw this really interesting chart the other day about how, again, circadian clock, and about how your strength and your cardiovascular fitness and your coordination, they all peak from about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And obviously during that time, you're well fed as well. So that seems to be a really nice time to do that sort of training and to get the best out of your training. But for me personally, getting it done in the morning fasted, that's just my preference. It's just what I like. But what I was going to ask, you said that you don't train fasted anymore. But when you have trained fasted, have you ever felt a difference in your performance?
If it's a very high intensity workout, I prefer to be fed. Now, whether that's, not too much, it just has to be, I think it's a simple science, essentially, that you have to have full glycogen storage, right? So they have to be full in order for you to perform at your, because that's what your body is going to prioritize. Unless you're more in ketosis, and then probably you can still perform quite well, not for as long, in my opinion, but you still can do it. But if you sort of go from having your glycogen available to not having it available within your training session, that's where you're going to probably collapse. Not collapse, but your performance is going to significantly drop, right? So if I know that I'm going to go for a longer one, so say I now sometimes do a double, so I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and kickboxing right back to back, which is two very, very high intensity sessions. I would have something in between. I usually very simple carbs with electrolytes, right? So something that I know will fuel me, I know will keep me focused, because when your focus, sort of drifts away, that's the worst feeling. And I think this is where I don't have a CGM. I don't wear the constant glucose monitor just because it doesn't work with contact sports yet. At least nobody invented anything. But
that makes me cringe a bit, just thinking about it in your arm and then doing contact sports. Like, that makes me cringe. Like,
I was going to do it though, but it would fall off. Like it wouldn't stay there. So but I think this is where my point being that this is where probably would drop, and this is why I could probably correlate the energy being low with my blood sugar dropping. So I think so to answer your question, weightlifting, not really. I didn't notice any strength difference. And cardiovascular high intensity, yes. I think it would probably be better for me being fed. Yeah. Or at least having sort of stuff available in my body so that you can be fueled.
That makes sense. So you have, I presume you still train a lot of female clients.
I have a few, yeah.
Yeah. Do you ever recommend, I mean, the way you're speaking, I'm thinking maybe you don't recommend it as a top priority for people, but do you ever recommend fasting for them? And if so, do you feel like there's any difference between your recommendations for women and for men? How does fasting differ between women and men, considering the menstrual cycle, which you mentioned previously?
I mean, for me, what I can recommend, I do, but I also have some very good nutritionists in my field that I work with. So, and the type of clients I work with, they're happy to work with a few different people. So they have the resources to do so, right? So, and I'm of the opinion that they're much better placed to advise than I am. Now, having said that, I can sort of practically advise, and I often do. For women, if they're interested, and depending on the personality type, I would, and depending on what, because I pretty much, I'm now had clients that I've known them for a very long time, so I probably would advise it. But again, I would tell them to track it very closely. One, not change just what we discussed before, that they shouldn't be changing too much at the same time, just because that can, you can't really, it's like taking supplements. If you take a stack of supplements, you know what works, what doesn't, right? If you take one supplement, one type of a supplement, you know whether it or not works for you. So it's the same with lifestyle changes, right? So dietary changes should probably come first, then you see how it works, then you can maybe add a change and then see how that works, right? But I always advise to approach more strategically, because people, the nature of people generally is that they want to change everything at the same time, right? Because I need to change, so everything needs to change. But that's not, and it's easy for me to say, because I'm quite a fit person, in good shape, I take care of my health. So for me, it's much easier to experiment just one thing. For them, they want to change everything in order to change themselves, right? So I would advise to try this out. One, if for women, for my female clients, I would advise them to start at a sort of lower base, and if that helps them to sort of reduce the calories intake, if weight loss is a goal, right? Because that's essentially what it comes down to. It comes to lower calorie intake and just more activity. So if someone chooses intermittent fasting to be their strategy to do that, then so be it. But it doesn't have to be it. And again, it just depends what people are like, right? Because not everyone wants to. The sheer thought, I think mentally, it's good for people to be able to understand that, okay, I'm not hungry, I just crave food, right? So there's a difference. But for men, I typically recommend fasting, because I think it's really good. But then again, not everyone, I have a client who just first thing in the morning he needs to eat, because if he doesn't, he just feels like he's going to faint. So it's, it all depends. But yeah, and the nutritionist I work with, she's a PhD, super clever, super smart, much smarter than I am in all sort of, all across the board. But she actually works with fasting quite a lot as well, and she is very research based, right? So she would base everything in sort of science, and so it's a good person to have in my field, so I can also bounce ideas of her, and I don't have to do the whole nutrition thing.
Amazing. I mean, the theme of today is fat loss, intermittent fasting, and then we've been kind of touching on keto here and there. So I'd like to dive into keto just a little bit more. The reason why I think fasting and keto are so closely related is because they kind of have the same kind of goal, don't they? They both want to reduce your blood glucose to like a stable level, and to reduce your insulin levels, and therefore that's when your body is going to dip into its fat stores for energy. So that's what they both have in common. So keto, you've already said that you go into it sometimes. How do you feel about keto at the moment? It seems you kind of weave in and out of, of these kind of these ways of eating. What is your stance on keto at the moment? Are you a fan, or what do you think?
I think, keto, again, the real ketogenic diet is much harder to do than people think it is, right? Because you would really have to measure it. You measure your ketones, one, and you really have to be, because people would have a lot of meat when they're on keto, but that's actually not keto, because through gluconeogenesis, your body will produce glucose out of protein, right?
Yeah.
So fat's pretty much the only one that doesn't, so you probably will have to consume much more fat, and very, like, I think 10% of protein, and almost like zero carbs, right? So like zero carbs essentially. So the true keto is difficult. Now, it all depends, as always. I think if that's something that works for you and you're happy doing that, you're happy with the dietary restriction, because it's you don't only restrict macronutrients, but you also restrict a lot of food, like fruit that also tastes good, right? I'm not talking about candy here. I'm talking about like fruit and lots of stuff, right? So things that people enjoy. If you want to do it, then yes, it's a very it's quite a drastic approach to diet. Doable for sure. I personally, I don't function that well on keto. I think I function much better sort of moderate carb diet, or more like carb cycling type of diet, where I sort of would take, if you will, a ketogenic approach per meal, right? So if I want to have a more steady focus, I don't do more keto, because it's a fasting mimicking diet in the end, right? So that's you sort of mimic fasting by eating fat.
Yeah.
So maybe that, or some is like as a snack, nuts and things. But generally, I think keto is slightly, it's not simple, and in the end, to lose body fat, you have to reduce your calorie intake, right? And if you choose so by doing keto or intermittent fasting, or whatever you choose, then it's up to you and up to what you enjoy eating, probably, right? So it's the best diet. The best diet doesn't exist. The best diet is the one that you can stick to for over an extended period of time, right? So it's, if that works for you, then yes. If that doesn't work, then no. And for certain conditions, that is a good approach as well. But again, it doesn't. I think it's a strategy. Again, it's a tool that if it works, you can use it. If it doesn't, you just should try something else.
I think it's really good for people who have, if they're struggling with blood sugar issues, like, and if they're gaining weight because of it. So they're just like, they crave carbohydrates, they're gaining weight and they don't know why, and they're kind of struggling with that. I think keto is, like you say, a tool that you bring in. And what it tends to do is it tends to, over time, take away those cravings, because, your blood sugar levels become more regulated. And it's funny, you say that people make this mistake with keto, that it's just about meat. And I couldn't agree more, because keto has such a bad reputation, because people just think it's like fatty meats and just piling on bacon and like lots of oil and grease, and it's just not the case. And actually, keto is, if you do it right, it looks very much like a plant-based diet, like probably how you used to eat when you were, back in the day, vegetarian. But with, a little bit of meat on the side, bit of fish. But really, it's all about, it's vegetarian heavy, it's plant heavy. And obviously healthy fats, so getting olive oil in, coconut oil if people can handle that, MCT oil again if people can handle that. So I find when I do keto properly, oh my gosh, like the biggest, obviously I lose any extra kind of water, so I tend to shrink, which I don't want to do at the moment. So I haven't done keto for a long time, and I haven't done a rigorous fasting regimen for a long time either, because I don't want to lose any more weight. However, when I have done keto in the past, every single time my skin is like the best that I ever see it. It's just, I'm like, after 3 weeks, I'm just like, oh my God, like my skin is just, and it's because it's so plant heavy, and keto forces you to just eat all of the vegetables. So if you think about your gut microbiome, and you think about how it's recommended that 30 plant foods a week is the goal for the most variation in your gut microbiome, the most bacteria kind of variation. So like keto can really help with that. It can really get you up to that level and get you focusing on plants more and fiber. And so it's really good for those things. But there will come a time where it's like, okay, it's time to have some carbs. Like if you're training for like a marathon, or if you train a lot in the gym, then obviously keto is a bit harder. So obviously you said keto affects your training. You find that you can't get to such a high intensity because you don't have the glycogen in your muscles to fuel the workout.
Maybe it could be that I've never been, I measured ketones before, but it could be that in these moments I haven't been truly ketogenic. So I think there is because there's a lot of athletes that actually perform on a very high level on ketogenic diets. Now, I just simply prefer to be, and again, I think one thing that needs to be clarified with ketogenic diet and non-ketogenic diet, that usually the distinction people make is, you eat healthy or you eat carbs, and carbs are this bad thing. Like, eating carbs doesn't mean that you eat like donuts and and cheesecakes and things, because that usually is, if you think about those foods, it's usually a mix of carbs and fats. That is the bad thing, right? But what a high carbohydrate or higher carbohydrate diet, a moderate carbohydrate diet would be more potatoes, more starchy carbs, more the healthy sources of the healthier source of carbs, right? So they don't necessarily there. So if you do keto, you have to understand that carbs are not bad for you. It's just how you want to fuel yourself, right? And I agree with you, keto for sure. And that feedback about skin, I heard it a lot. And but again, you probably could if you did that same thing with carbs, but like the variety of vegetables. But if that particular diet makes you eat more vegetables, then amazing, right? So amazing, so be it, and just so then do it. But what I don't like about, and that's because the online world at the moment is very sort of divided.
Yeah.
You'd always have the opposites and extremes. So you would go, oh, ketogenic, because otherwise you eat too much sugar, so don't eat fruit. Fruit is bad for you. It's not. It's so there's what I dislike about the whole conversation about diets and the ways of eating and strategies, etc., about nutrition, that people get very polarized, and I'm not a fan of this, right? Because there's never a one single way of just getting to the goal that you set out for yourself. There's always many ways, and which one you choose is your thing, right? You can obviously, you have to be, I think, as a fitness professional, you have to know about them. You have to try them all. You have to sort of understand why things are done, and because then you can also advise better, in my opinion. So it's sometimes people say, oh, you don't need a trainer who trains, you need a trainer who's knowledgeable. I disagree with it. It's like you wouldn't want a dentist with bad teeth, right? Like it's probably not the best. So you almost have to experience all that to understand. It's the same with nutrition. So you have to experience that, see how it works for you, so you can tell people about your experiences, but then they will be able to try it for themselves, right? But that's a certain personality type. That's not for everyone.
I heard this really, really great kind of quote the other day. It says, it's not motivation that you need, it's momentum, because motivation burns out. So we've all been motivated before. We've all been motivated to do keto or to fast or to train or to get into shape. But then without the momentum behind it, it's hard to maintain that motivation, and the motivation always burns out. So that made me think about keto for some reason, because I was like, keto gives you that momentum because you get results so quick in the beginning. It's like, okay, and then you're kind of on this wave and you get motivated. So that's another reason why I quite like keto and fasting as tools. But I think the general theme here, and I'm in agreement with you, it really is down to the person and what they like. And if it's not for them, it's not for them. If it is, great, like go for it and be safe, make sure someone's kind of helping you out. But yeah, I'm in alignment with that. So, I mean, okay, so let's steer away from fasting and keto. And when it comes to your kind of best tips for fat loss in general, like what have you found with yourself, with your clients? Like what helps them best? You mentioned calorie reduction, just anything like that. What do you think? If someone wants to lose body fat who's listening to this, what do you think they should start doing?
I think one, make sure that you increase activity, decrease food, right? Intake, and make sure you have a varied diet with a lot of vegetables and protein and fats. And so I'm sort of at the moment, what works best, what I see is a more balanced approach in which people have all macronutrients included in the diet, just because it's easier to adhere. And I think the longer you can stick to something, the better results you're going to see. That's the number one. Move more is the one that it doesn't necessarily have to mean that you train more, but you generally move more, right? So if you feel about, and the little things add up to big changes, because say, I see always, so for example, yesterday I landed back from the States, we said before, and you sit on the plane for like 11 hours. right? So to me, it's like you're sitting so much, you probably want to move, right? But you then see people going at the airport and then on the escalators, and they just stand on the escalators. I'm like, you just weren't moving for 11 hours, so just move, you know? So to me, these small things add up. So you just can walk to the shop, you can walk to the tube station instead of taking the bus, right? Or you can, is the US people drive a lot, just walk more, right? So I think walking is such an underrated form of activity, just because it's a low impact cardio, right? So you just walk and I love walking. I think and it also, there is a certain thing that happens, and so there's a lateral eye movement which makes you come up with creative ideas, and it can helps you process things. So there's a lot of stuff that it's actually so much good coming out of it. Plus, it burns more calories, right? And then at home, just do more stuff, just move more, just stand up, move around. So essentially, moving more. Like if you work at the office, just get a standing desk, or anything that makes you more active generally. And then sleep is also super important. So just make sure that you have good sleep, and we could go into that as well. So have good sleep hygiene. Make that you just make a ritual of going to sleep, right? And then try and get up at the same time. Try and do it consistently. I understand that weekends sometimes can be different, but even then, try and get that consistency. So I think the general advice would be consistency in everything you do, and just do it and be patient with it. Because there's I don't believe in quick fixes. Obviously, you can get into an amazing shape in like 3 months, probably 2 to 3 months. You can be there can be a huge difference, but that will require a lot of change, right? And you then could yo-yo potentially at the end of it. Where I think a much more sustainable strategy is to just do things consistently over time and plan it for a longer term. It's like, an overnight success happens in 10 years. It doesn't happen one night. It's a lot of hard work that goes into it. And it's the same with body composition. And I like writing things down and planning things out, because there's something very powerful about putting pen to paper and actually making sure that you have goals, you have objectives, and you set them, and you have a timeline as well. So you have this goal setting, so that by when you want to achieve what. But then equally, don't stress yourself if one day doesn't go to plan. Fine, there's another day. You just started, and but I think consistency and patience over time, but consistency in everything you do. And if things don't work at first, give it some more time. If they still don't work, then change one thing at a time. Don't change everything at the same time. I think these are the main things.
I think there's a statistic, and I'm really taking this out of the recesses of my brain right now, but if you write something down, like a goal, you're 42% more likely to actually do it. And I'm pretty sure that's the actual number, 42% more likely to achieve it. So I agree completely. I mean, I have my journal, and I tend to journal everything, and in there I tend to put in the things that I want and like the goals, and I just think it's so important. And I really believe that, yes, pen to paper is so important. But then I also wanted to go back even further just now to what you said about sleep. And I want to really back that up and second that, because training, nutrition, and sleep, those three things, it's up there with nutrition and training. Study after study has shown that night workers have more body fat around their middle, and that's just the way it is, because your body tends to store fat because you're not sleeping, so the cortisol is up, and so you tend to store fat in areas that you don't really want it. You don't really want it around the waist. But if you can have the perfect training program, the perfect nutrition program, but if you're not sleeping, then they basically they don't mean anything. They're not really going to come to fruition for you. So sleep is everything.
And there's I agree with that. I think sleep is the single most important thing. And then
you'd put it first. You'd be like
number one because it affects everything, right? So but then sleep affects your nutrition, and then you have ghrelin, leptin, and then that's the hormones will play with you. And if your rest is not sufficient, your sleep wasn't sufficient, that will affect your hunger levels, and then you eat more and you will train less just because. So that's it's a vicious cycle, right? Now, but also I would say, going back to what I said before, sorry, because I forgot one thing, because at the moment, metformin, rapamycin, they're all sort of like the talk of town. So everyone is, you just take one pill and that's just going to solve all the issues. Obviously, that sort of lowers the blood sugar, the responses, and I would be very cautious with that, because it's still building good habits. There's a lot of very promising data. There's a lot of very promising data about rapamycin, about metformin, and that having positive effects on longevity and regulate blood sugar, etc. But what I see now amongst a lot of people, my clients, but also what people tell me, is that they sort of take it and they hope that will be the solution, right? So they keep doing what they're doing. So they will keep drinking, they will keep eating, they will keep going out, sleeping less, sleeping little. But they take the pill and sort of they see good results because they better than they were before. But that's just not going to substitute building good habits. And for me, fat loss, okay, it's one thing, but fat loss, I like this, there's this concept of backcasting. So how you think about training is pretty much the opposite, because if you think about goal setting, it's forecasting, right? So you forecast where you're going to be in, say, 12 months time, right? But if you flip it on its head, it's backcasting. So think about, what do you want to be able to do in the last 10 years of your life in terms of your physical health and mental health as well, and work backwards from that side. So what do you have to start doing now in order to have the longevity in your training and your movement, right? So that puts the whole training, nutrition into a much larger, much more important perspective, in which you say, I won't say I have a child, I don't have a child, but say I have a child, I want to be able to play with my grandchildren, right? When I'm 80, say. So I want to be able to get off the floor, I want to be able to play with them. So if you put your fitness goals in the broader perspective of your health, and I think that's where that's what some of the best minds of the industry are going, that you sort of have to look at an individual holistically, and you want to set long-term goals. It's like with a business, right? You don't want to be profitable 1 year only, and then you don't care what happens. You want to think about it in the longer term, right? So you want longer term, 10 years, 20 years. So you want to think about it, but that's, so think about your body as if it were your business, that you maybe just started, you're working on it, but think about it in much longer term and put it into much broader perspective. So doing good for your health, but not only, you don't only get ready for the summer and you have a six pack and then, you look good in the bikini, but then you just sort of like, okay, winter comes, I'm fine, but that's probably not the best way to be. That's why when we mentioned before about, the sort of bulking, cutting, but the typical bodybuilding approach, turns out it's probably not the healthiest, just because you play with the body composition way too much, right? So it's probably much healthier to stay consistent. But again, I think if you put it into perspective of health and longer term sort of, longevity, as in you live a much better quality life, maybe the same amount of time, but a much better quality life. So your vitality is at a much higher level than it would be otherwise, right? So I think it's, if you put that into perspective, and fat loss is one of the, you lose fat to keep it, to maintain it. You don't lose fat just to prepare for one event and then again another one, whether it's a wedding or whatever else, right? So I think that this is how I like looking into, and that also changed my mindset about my training, right? So maybe I'm not going to kill myself so much anymore, but maybe I'm still stupid sometimes doing, ridiculous stuff, but it generally changed the way I feel and think about nutrition, sleep, and anything I do in this sort of broadly understood health, because area of my life, and also my clients, at least that's what I'm trying to do, because you have to remember, now not everyone wants to do it, not everyone wants to think about it, and not everyone is so, health is not on the priority list just because they're afraid to think about it, right? And it's understandable. I'm not saying, but that's what I'm trying to sort of teach my clients and educate them, that it's a much longer journey, and it's not only what they lift, it's also what they eat, how they sleep, how they see their relationships, how they how they think about their life, what they consume in terms of the media and news, etc. So everything forms this image of a holistic. I know there's a lot of companies that started doing exactly that, and there's in the US a few people I met with. There are people in the UK that do sort of, they would look at an individual. They have a board of 6 people, one of which is nutritionist, psychologist, a strength and conditioning trainer, a couple of doctors, and maybe someone else who takes care of that individual. And they would look at the state of that individual and then would try and collectively take that individual to a better health, right? Obviously, that's a very expensive offering, and that's not everyone can. So it's a very sort of exclusive health offering, but you can do it yourself as well, right? So you can look at different areas of your life and say, we are fitness professionals, but not really. We are. AI will soon be able to do what we do without even, and that's probably sooner than we imagine. I actually last week I met with someone who was one of the first employees of OpenAI, ChatGPT, and they actually, they explained it to me, and I'm under the impression we just have no idea what's going on, right? So, and that's not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, not at all, but it's a technology that I think is going to change a lot. So we as fitness professionals, I think we have to be more coaches rather than just movement thing or just nutrition or just that doesn't exist anymore, I think, So I think if you put the goals, that's a long-winded way of saying that if I were to advise someone on what to think about when they're on the weight loss journey or fat loss journey, because that's also a difference, right? Depending on your starting point, then you want to think about your health as number one priority and think about long term rather than think about wedding or next summer or next beach holiday, right? So I think that, again, having explained to a few people that has helped them to understand that it's a much broader perspective than just that one event that they could have to get ready for.
I think basically what you're trying to say is, and I'm in agreement. First of all, when you say that people should be thinking of the long term, they absolutely should. But the first thing I want to say is, but people just, there's, like you said, they don't like to think like that. They just want everything like ASAP, like their food deliveries and like their Amazon deliveries. They just want their ideal body in like 2 seconds. So it is a mindset shift that needs to happen. And I find with clients, when I try and take it slow with them, they get frustrated. They're just like, but where's my results? Where's my results? So it is hard. Like as a coach, you need to really navigate that. Like you're not just an AI handing out instructions. You're a person who needs to educate, empathize, and kind of help someone through and help them change their mindset. So that's the first thing. And the next thing is fat loss. I think if you go into a program, this is difficult to ask of someone, but if you go into a program just wanting fat loss and just wanting to lose weight and not thinking about any of the other stuff that you've just spoken about, it's a dangerous path, because what I'm finding, and I wonder if you think the same, fat loss is like a side effect. It's like the gift you get at the end after you've fixed all that other stuff. So after you've fixed your sleep, your lifestyle, your stress levels, after you're setting your goals and, you're working with your body and your environment and you're kind of getting an ease with yourself, fat loss then comes and it's really easy. But you have to get all that stuff first. Do you agree? Do you find that?
I think I would compare it to the following. So, and that would probably is the so how you get the dopamine release. And again, I'm not a scientist, but I listen to that stuff a lot. I'm interested in it. Is hard work allows you to release a lot of more dopamine. So you have a better reward when you work hard for something, right? Think about people that won a lottery. They usually there's a very it's a very well-known fact that people that sometimes they win a lot of money, they lose it straight away, right? So it's whereas if they work hard for it for a much longer period of time, they value it more and respect it more, right? So it's the same probably similar mentality to you get the fat loss, and you have a lot of gyms that do it. This whole business model is to get people to a certain point, right? Take a picture of them before and after, and that's it. I wonder what happens with these people afterwards. Probably a lot of them stay fit because they got that reward, right? But a lot of them would probably yo-yo back to what they were before, or even worse, right? Whereas if you work hard for a longer period of time, understand understand the sort of slow reward of getting better and better and better progressively, that's probably the thing. One thing that's behavioral science says that we said about goal setting, right? So if you set a goal, you sort of have to visualize that goal, and you just sort of head towards it. There's one thing that apparently helps a lot with reaching that goal, really. And there was a comparison. Again, I don't remember the statistics now and the numbers, but Jenny, what it said was that if you also visualize the ways in which you can fail, so what will actually hinder you from getting to that goal, you're much more likely to succeed. Just because it's almost like you're creating a plan B in your head, that if these things go wrong, or which things, so say, in simple terms, okay, on a daily basis, I want to eat healthier, but again, then I'm busy and I'm out all the time, right? So how you could approach that, you would be, okay, I'm going to look at areas I'll be at the restaurants that are there, and we'll look for healthier options, and I know what to get, right? Rather than being tempted. So plan ahead and know what can hinder you from getting to that goal, and then you can actually plan ahead to get that done as well. Because then if you only visualize that success, then whatever failure you have, you're probably going to bring down and then motivate you towards getting better. But no, I think it's I agree with you. It's hard to explain to people. It's a long-term journey, and it's like having a candy and having a piece of fruit. A candy is probably going to be more satisfying very short term, but a piece of fruit is going to make you feel better for a longer period of time. And this is how, when people, there's this famous question, what would be your last meal, right? And I always say we probably some sort of healthy and balanced meal, like a really good quality fish and sweet potato and vegetables, just because that I really enjoy it. And people think I'm crazy when I say it, but I learned to enjoy what makes me feel good in the long term. That's not to say that I don't like eat cheesecake sometimes, whatever. But whenever I, the 5, 10, 20 minutes later, when I have this crash, I'm like, oh, and the aftertaste on it as well, I'm like, oh, it actually wasn't that needed. And even if you have, so I learned to enjoy the way I feel long term rather than the way I feel short term, right? So it's I think it's a distinction that you have to understand, but that comes only if you try and do it, try and error and see what works, what doesn't.
Yeah, learning how you feel when you eat certain foods, that's the key. That's the answer. If you learn to appreciate how your body feels after choosing healthier foods, then that's your way in. That's the golden ticket. So, yeah. But it's getting to that point that can be tough for people. But yeah, I really liked that. I really like that analogies, the analogies that you gave. But when it comes to so we've spoken about diet, we've spoken about kind of sleep and everything. Is there any other sort of kind of body, because you're the body optimization guy, you're the one who experiments all this stuff. So is there any stuff that we should be doing as well as like on the side, like, cold therapy, red light, and all of this stuff that people are talking about? Do you recommend any of these things? Like what kind of lifestyle activities do you recommend people get into?
I think, anything. Okay. Yes. So there's a lot of stuff I experiment with. That's true. Now I always try and be cautious. Like I wouldn't go into things. I'm sort of always cautious about trends, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to try it for sure. And a lot of my friends say I'm crazy about it. Like whatever new is there out there, they'll be like, oh, you're just so wild for it. True, but there's a lot of stuff that I'm sort of cautious about, and it's usually on that sort of too much risk type of things. But in terms of lifestyle, I think cold exposure is great, and there's data to support this. So, for example, there's data that says that if individuals who have exposed themselves to who've been having a cold shower every day for like half a minute, I think it was 30 seconds, and one cold immersion, so meaning an ice bath per week, they had a significantly less body fat percentage, lower body fat percentage than the ones who didn't, right? So that's good data to support. And also, I firmly believe that you have to you have to expose yourself to some type of discomfort on a daily basis.
I
So
agree.
I like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not comfortable. For example, all you do, you play with pain. So you apply pain, you get pain, and you have to think. And when you do that, right? So it's a very uncomfortable situation to be in. Cold exposure is super uncomfortable. Sauna, super uncomfortable as well at some point, right? But then also think about the stress that you get with it, right? You want to apply the stress, but so that it helps you and not that it exhausts. Training is uncomfortable. And if you do too much training, too much cold exposure, too much all that stuff, and then you stress at work, then that accumulates. So I think everything in moderation again. And I always try and find data that supports stuff. So we know sauna is great for you, right? So essentially, the more you do, the better it gets in terms of health benefits and outcomes. Cold exposure is great for you. Not more, the more the better. There is numbers, and I think that can be looked up very easily. Then any type of, I think, meditation, but I generally don't meditate. I do more sort of like yoga nidra, non-sleep deep rest protocols, the ones that sort of are body scans more, right? So I know like they are amazing for me. So especially when I coach clients and I have to switch to a different mode, working on my startup, working on the different projects I have, it's a completely different way of thinking, right? That helps me really to switch in between. So I really, that helps. And then, fasting is a tool that helps optimizing the way you think. And when you want to be sort of clear about stuff and you want to be thinking clear as well, that helps as well. I think there's a lot of plenty of, and then, then I have, so when I travel, I have little hacks that I use. The time shifter I mentioned to you before we went on air is an app that helps you to mitigate jet lag, onset of jet lag.
Again?
Time shifter.
Time shifter.
It's an app that is great. It's comes at a very low cost and helps you to mitigate the onset of jet lag. Then I would use I'd use this little device, which is essentially like a small EMS device called PowerDot. And when you travel, you can attach it to your legs, and it just helps you stimulate your muscle, so you don't get you can get like water retention. And it really helps you to move. Then things like when you travel, you would get electrolytes because you would get dehydrated in the plane. But that's when you travel a lot, right? So then there's a lot of little hacks and tools that you can apply to just optimize the way you feel and help you to perform better when you need to do so.
There's a book, and while you're talking, I was just looking for the title on my audiobooks. But when you said that we need to do something uncomfortable every day, I really agree with that. And there's an awesome book. I wonder if you've read it. It's called The Comfort Crisis. Have you read it? By Michael Easter?
I heard of it. I was actually recommended to me. Yeah.
You should read it. It's right up your street. So basically that's what he's all about. He's like, he realized that his health skyrocketed as soon as he started doing really uncomfortable stuff. So in his book, he basically went out into the wilderness with this guy, and they were just surviving and hunting for their food, and it was cold, and they weren't sleeping properly, and it was just, but he was talking about his fasting as well. He was just like, I was doing fasting, and he said this really great quote, and I can't remember it fully, but he was just basically like, something happens to the body, something amazing happens when you do really effing hard shit.
Yeah,
like there's something happens, and I think there's something in it because for example, myself, I've grown up very, very comfortably, like most of us have, like warm homes and televisions, but there's something that when you have too much of all that stuff, there's something icky about it. And you can't put your finger on why. You just feel uncomfortable and you don't feel great. But then as soon as you do something that like let's say the cold therapy, or you do a jiu-jitsu session, like suddenly you're revitalized. And I think there's really something in that. And I'm personally trying to push myself to do it a bit more. I'm not great at it because I do like to be comfortable, but I do know that it's important.
But it's everyone. And this, again, I'm sitting here in a beautiful office in London Park Lane, and and just talking about discomfort. But I think there are levels to it. I went to this talk. I don't remember who the name of the lady, but she was super impressive. She would do this like races that would be over days through the jungle and with like bugs all over her and like with all the teams, and there'll be broken legs and things, and it's like, okay, this is discomfort, but also you can take it to that level. You can sort of apply on a daily basis. It depends, but everything is okay, and you can also gradually increase that, but also don't be ridiculous about it, right? So, but I think there's a huge value to it, and I think that everyone should be exposed to some type of discomfort on a daily basis, just because it really puts things into perspective, right? So I think, and it teaches you to be a slightly more resilient human being.
Yeah.
Which I think we all need.
But then also, you mentioned longevity before with metformin, and I think it's, who is it, David Sinclair? He's kind of leading the charge in that, and basically he says that your cells, if basically the key to longevity is if your cells think that they're going to die. So if they're at risk, that's when your health jacks up, and that's when your longevity increases. So that's happening on a cellular level. So basically what we're talking about is the expression of, on a global level for us. We're just like, okay, so we need to do some hard shit, because it could be just the key to longevity. Maybe too much comfort is not good for longevity. Maybe, if you want to live longer, then do some hard shit. Maybe that's what this is.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, all we're talking about is a lot of that is uncomfortable. And change is always uncomfortable, but in the end, it pays off usually, right? So typically, I mean, not always, but typically, if it's applied purposefully, you do it for a better. So fasting is stressful. It's not, as we said, it's not for everyone, but it then probably brings a good result, right? So it's all relative, but I think it's something that I would advise everyone does, right? So just expose you to some type of discomfort on a daily basis.
Nice. Cool. That's all my questions, and I'm so fulfilled. Like, that was such a good conversation. I got everything I needed out of that. That was brilliant.
Amazing.
Is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with? Is there any kind of finishing kind of comments or anything, or do you feel like you've covered it?
No, if anyone has any questions, I'm always happy to be reached out to. I'm available on Instagram. You can just put it in the show notes.
Yep.
And I'm happy to, I like communicating with people about health because it's my passion, and I'm lucky enough to work in that field. So, and it's I think the more people are it's there's this weird discrepancy between the knowledge being larger, but yet the health being worse globally. So there's something that needs to happen on a global stage, because and also there's so much wealth of knowledge that's available right now. It never has been the case before. Yet we need filters to, because also the bad, not bad, but like, bad information is out there as well, right? So people are very confused. So I think it's important to have people who sort of look at it from a perspective, tried it, but also look at it from a sort of through a healthy lens. I think that's important.
Maybe AI will be the answer, but that's another conversation.
Probably.
Another time.
Yeah, that's another conversation. Well, thanks so much then. Appreciate it.
Anyway, thank you so much. That was brilliant. We'll chat again soon.